Welcome to my book club, and today I'm especially thrilled to be joined by an author whose books are loved by readers around the world. Paige Toon started her career in the world of celebrity journalism before turning her hand to fiction, and we're so glad she did, because with over 15 best-selling novels to her name, including favourites like The Longest Holiday, 5 Years from Now, and Only Love Can Hurt Like This, she is known for creating emotional, beautifully crafted stories that really stay with you. And her latest novel, What If I Never Get Over You, is another stunning, bittersweet story about love and loss and second chances. And it's already getting rave reviews. So I can't wait to dive into the story behind the story. Let's welcome the wonderful Paige Toon to the show. Paige.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it because I know you've just come off the back of a very hectic book tour promoting this latest novel, haven't you?
That's right. Yeah, 3 weeks almost completely back to back. It's been like my biggest tour yet, but it's been amazing.
So now you're at home. You're probably already thinking about the next book, aren't you?
I'm working on the edits like today and yesterday, so I've got until the 19th of May to do all of my edits and then.
And that's not out until what, spring 2026? I saw in the flyleaf at the back.
Right. Yep. Don't fall in love with me. That's right.
Don't fall in love with me. Well, I will be looking out for that one. This one, What If I Never Get Over You, which if you're watching on YouTube, I'm showing. Such a lovely book. Now, you've written many. You've written over 15 now. What gave you the inspiration behind this one? There's a link to astronomy and science that will become apparent when people read it. But what made you come up with this plot, this idea?
It's hard to sort of remember where all of the inspiration came from for this particular story. You know, sometimes my ideas are really clear cut and I make a note of them, and then it's really easy to say, oh, and it all came from here. But with this one, I had like the seed of an idea a few years ago about this idea of this girl who grows up on like a grand estate that's open to the public, and imagine what that would be like. So sharing a home with the public and, maybe kind of like being attracted to someone, like a sort of hot gardener or something like that.
Imagine.
And then I also had another idea, which was the one that I started moving forward with, about this guy who lives off grid and just the commitment that it would take to be with someone who was completely off grid. And basically Ash and Ellie, the two main characters, come from seeds of those original ideas. But
right.
The story itself is very different. Yeah, it is told over several different parts.
Well, let's take you back a little bit then, because you're started your career in celebrity journalism. What made you make the switch into writing? Is it something that you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, I've wanted to write ever since I can remember. It was the first job that I ever remember wanting to do when I was quite young. So I've always wanted to be an author. But when I was a teenager and I started reading magazines, I started thinking, I know what I'll do. I'll go and work for a magazine first, and then I'll become an author when I want to have kids, as though it was that easy.
Oh, yeah, just do it that way.
But I did, I ended up getting into magazines, and I worked as a reviews editor at Heat magazine about, oh my goodness, it was like over 18 years ago, because I basically left when I had my son and when I got a book deal. And, I absolutely loved it. But I would see all of these books come in. And even though I had this idea that I've been thinking about for a few years, I just couldn't imagine sort of spanning it out into 100,000 words, or that it would ever be good enough to get published. So, yeah. To actually sort of turn that into a reality has just been my absolute dream.
So when you took that first step, and because of your background in journalism, were you rejected to start with? Did you have a few stumbles before you got accepted, or was it an easier route than that?
It was ridiculously easy. Like, it just doesn't happen like this. But it had, sort of started writing my first novel. I'd only written about 3 pages, but I'd been thinking about this idea for a long time. And I knew a couple of publicists who worked for some publishers who I'd become friends with, because obviously over the years, I've met so many. I used to be in charge of the Heat chart, and which was like a top 10 in books, and lots of people used to get in touch.
So what makes a good book. You can sense that. You get this is the whiff of something really good here in my hands. I know this is going to be a bestseller.
Honestly, I just knew what I loved, and I wanted to write what I loved, which was romance, and that was, that was the thing that I was always drawn to. It's the thing that I loved reading more than anything else. So, but anyway, I'd gone out for lunch with one of these publicists who I knew, and his name was Nigel Stoneman. He worked for Simon & Schuster, and he said to me, he said, "You should write a book, love. You'd get a book deal working for Heat magazine," which was the biggest magazine at the time. It was selling like 600,000 copies a week, and it was like the biggest magazine in the UK. And I said, "Well, I do have an idea." And anyway, I told him this idea about this girl who gets on this plane, 24-hour flight to Australia. Just before takeoff, she gets a text message to her phone from her boyfriend's number saying, "I've slept with your boyfriend 4 times this month." And then she has to switch off her phone.
That's
and
awful.
and there's obviously much more to the story than that, but that was the opening, the opening line. And Nigel said to me, "I love it. I'm going to go back and tell the publisher." And 5 minutes after I got back to the office, I had an email from her asking to meet in a week's time. That weekend, I wrote the first 3 chapters, a 5,000-word synopsis. My brother came up with the title Lucy in the Sky. And on the Wednesday, we met up, and 2 days later, I'd been offered a 2-book deal.
Crazy.
I know, it was
It
crazy.
doesn't happen like that, does it?
Really, really rare. But Nigel said to me, he said, "I'd tell him you can write it by Christmas and have it out next April." And it was September. And I had a full-time job. I'd never managed to get this book written more than that weekend. Like literally I sort of wrote 3 chapters very, very fast, but I couldn't write 3 pages prior to that. But for some reason I suggested it. She said, "This is quite rare for us to do that. Normally we work like a year and a half in advance, but okay." This was September. I ended up writing the book in 2.5 months, delivering it before Christmas. It came out in April, and I've written a book a year ever since. So that was 2006, 2007. So yeah, it's
That is
great.
really amazing. Well, how do you keep going? So you have written a book a year. It must be really hard to come up with new plots all the time and to not sort of fall into anything kind of too formulaic and to keep everything fresh. What are you jotting notes all the time, or you go on a cruise, or you go on a vacation or something like that? Like just somebody in the crowd has just captured your imagination at the airport or wherever it is. How do you collect all this information and wind it into stories?
Ideas just come to me as and when. Like they'll come out of the blue. It'll be something that someone says, something that I've seen on a film or in a book, or some emotion that I've experienced that I want to then create myself to feel, as I'm writing. Often it comes from the emotion, or it might be a lyric in a song, that I just like. It kind of speaks to me at some sort of level, and then all of a sudden the whole story is just completely like spun out in a totally different direction. And sometimes I have different ideas that all incorporate themselves into the same book. Like I might have 2 separate book ideas and then realize that they'll actually work together. And I'm just inspired all the time. And I tend to get, even though I've got a few book ideas in my head, I tend to get the book idea that I want to write as I'm writing the one before. So I've, back in February, came up with the idea for the book that I'm going to start writing in September. And I've just had a chat to my editor actually and just sort of talked her through it and got the green light.
And they're on board with it. Oh, that's
Yeah.
exciting. Well, let's look at this one then. So, What If I Never Get Over You? It's out now. 3 days to fall in love, 6 years to try to forget. It hooked me from the beginning. I really enjoyed it. And Beth O'Leary, who I've had on the book club before, she's given it a lovely review. Truly gorgeous love story. Giovanna Fletcher, a roller coaster of emotions. It's about Ellie and Ash, isn't it? Do you want to give us a little non-spoiler alert summary of what the novel's about?
Sure. Well, you meet Ash with literally the first line. He says, "Is this seat taken?" And Ellie's sitting on this rooftop hostel in Lisbon. She's been interrailing. She's actually feeling really lonely and she's thinking about giving up. And then this hot backpacker from Wales sits down opposite her and suddenly things look up. And they have these 3 really incredible days together. And there's a lot of chemistry. They have a lot of fun. They do lots of exploring in these really beautiful settings. But ultimately, they bond over this shared experience that they've both had that's been quite traumatic. They get really close. Towards the end, they sort of, take things to the next level.
Uh-huh.
Then she decides to carry on interrailing with him, but they're going their separate ways for a week, and they agree to meet in Madrid. But Ellie is late, and Ash never shows up. And so she's completely heartbroken. She's there for, a week, sort of treading the streets, trying to look for him, trying to find out what happened. And then we meet up with her again 6 years later. And she's basically at that point followed her dream. She didn't want to work for the family business, but went along with it for a few years.
And a
And
lot
then,
of that encouraged by Ash. Even in just those 3 days, he had a profound impact on her future.
yes, he really did. Yeah, he really wanted her to follow her dreams. And said life was too short and basically sort of encouraged her to do that. But she's so broken at the end of Madrid that she goes back and joins a family business. But we do then quite quickly see her move through. By the time you get to part 2, which is 6 years later, she's now followed her dream. She's got a job as a gardener on this grand sort of estate in Wales with this 500-year-old house. And basically Ash comes crashing back into her life in a way that you won't expect. Certainly, like that was the most fun I've ever had writing, was writing this moment they see each other again. It's a good fun bit.
Yes, that was a breathtaking moment, I would say, in the book when they lay eyes on each other again.
For the first time in 6 years. Yeah, it was so fun, like this book, because it was told over a number of years. It was really fun to kind of like pick them back up again, have them meet again, being at different stages in their lives, seeing the way that their relationship unfolds and all the challenges that are thrown in their path. They certainly go through it, but anyone who's read my book before this, Seven Summers, will be relieved that it's not quite as heartbreaking. It's a little bit more like,
it's a journey we go on, isn't it? It's definitely a journey.
I'm
going to take you back a little bit again, because I think the fact that Ash is a student doing his master's of astronomy, it plays in quite a lot into the novel, doesn't it? Sort of this feeling of space and looking at the stars and going to space centers and so on. What made you kind of give him that background?
A few reasons. When I wrote Seven Summers, it included, this is the book before this one, it included so many absolutely huge topics that I knew next to nothing about. Like the research was completely overwhelming. And so when I wrote this one, I decided I'm going to choose topics that, not as many topics for a start. So gardening, I knew nothing about gardening, but, that research felt manageable because it was one topic, and astronomy. And I wanted to learn about astronomy. It was something that I was interested in, but had just sort of never taken the time to, read up about the stars and astronomy. And I did a lot of research, obviously nowhere near that.
I can tell you did a lot of research, because you would have to the way that you have explained things about the moon in here, you have to have understood it to be able to lay it out in layman's terms to share with Ellie.
Yeah, there's barely any of the research that I actually did makes it in, but I still wanted to understand him at like a level of, and also I like the fact that Ellie's about, the earth and the ground, and he's about the stars and the planets. And
there's that pull together, isn't there? That it's almost like a gravity pull, I suppose, between the earth and space.
That's right. Now, it was really just something that, something that just interested me, and I thought it'd be fun to write about. And then I loved the way that story developed. And part of the reason I set it in Wales was because it's this dark sky area that I'd seen on a map and thought, well, that's where this scene could take place, and whether, that sort of part of the book could take place. And then, I just thought it'd be really nice to set it in a part of the UK that I hadn't written properly about before.
Your descriptions of a lot of the places in Lisbon in the very early part of the book are very specific. It seems to me that you must have been to those. Was that part of a bonus part of writer's research, is that you went abroad to Lisbon to go and see those?
Yeah, my family holiday every year for the last 18 or so years has been dictated by where I'm going to set my next book. In the case of Lisbon, though, actually, like my parents have a holiday villa in Portugal, and we've been going there since I was young. And so I've been to Lisbon a few times, and I went there just with my husband for a mini break to do specific book research. And that was so fun. Like I love being able to write about places that I've actually visited, or to actually like be going there for research, to sit in a bar and imagine the scene playing out, taking photographs, looking and
like a movie.
Completely. Like all of my books feel like a little movie inside my head. So, and Lisbon was great to be able to write about. Initially, the idea for Seven Summers was set in Portugal, and I felt kind of guilty because I've been going to Portugal for so many years, and then I ended up setting it in Cornwall, so that was part of the reason as well. I was like, okay, I'll start my next book in Lisbon. And then
but it totally makes sense. It makes sense that they're in this hot, dry, sunny city, and they come together through interrailing. It's a lovely beginning of it. So your novels often deal with big emotions, love and heartbreak and healing. How do you tap into those feelings when you're writing? Do you look back on something that you've experienced, or are you just really good at finding that thread of emotion?
I think I'm really good at finding that thread of emotion. Like it's something, for me, writing feels like method acting. I literally feel like I'm inside the character's head, fully immersing myself with what she's thinking, really imagining it, and then feeling it as I'm writing it, and sometimes I put on songs to help me, like if it's a sad scene or a sexy scene or something like that, I will, that's right, there's a playlist at the back of the book.
Yes. What a lovely little segue you just gave me. Yes, how unusual to have songs that inspired the writing of What If I Never Get Over You. It's actually inspired me to go and listen to some of them on Spotify, I must say. So things like Total Eclipse of the Heart makes sense with the Moon by Bonnie Tyler. I haven't really come across Wolf Alice before, so I'm going to have to check that out. But Casey Musgraves and Conan Gray, Zach Bryan, Radiohead, Creep, that plays quite a big role, doesn't it? What a lovely idea to provide a playlist to your readers that they can have that sort of multi-sensory experience, if you like.
Yeah, I've always written to music, apart from for a couple of books when I had a tiny baby next to me, and actually the noise of kids, like basically I just needed peace and quiet when I was actually sitting down to write. But I've almost always written all of my books listening to music. And just with my last couple, especially, well, Seven Summers was, there's a rock star, there's a singer-songwriter as like one of the characters. And so, I decided to include a lot of songs with that one. But prior to that, I had a whole playlist that I was listening to for that book, ended up publishing that. And I just thought from now on, I'm just going to put the playlist in the back of the book because it's really nice, I think, as a reader
It's a
experience.
bonus. It's like gravy. It's like extra. Yes. Now, okay, so you see your characters, you imagine them in full flesh, what they think, what they say, how they feel. Who would play them in a movie? Do you ever think of actors as well? Do you like think of somebody like quite viscerally, or do you try and avoid an actual person?
I just don't see them as anyone other than themselves inside my head. So
So
I
you're
find
unique.
readers will always ask me, who would you cast in the movie? And I love hearing what readers would suggest because I love, sort of seeing how people might imagine them. But I find it impossible to, and I wish that I could do it a little bit more because it would be easier if I ever wanted to sort of approach someone about turning any of my books into a film, I'm sure it would be more helpful to be able to say, I imagine this person playing this character and, sending them a copy of the book, but, perhaps. So I maybe need to start thinking about that a bit more, but I just don't, like at the moment, they look so clearly like there might be a dimple that reminds me of someone or, like a jawline or something that I've seen and want to try to
An
describe.
echo of somebody. Yeah. Who of your readers since they've been, because this has been out for not long, couple of weeks, I think.
I haven't had anyone send me like
Have you
castings
not?
really
It's
yet. No.
everywhere. Paige, this book is everywhere. It's in every bookshelf. It's on every poster board. I don't know whether I'm just more sort of tuned into it, but it's everywhere. And I'm sure sales are going to be great for this because we're coming into the summer season. We're getting nice warmer weather. Book sales, I would imagine, go up quite a lot as it gets into sort of May and June and people start packing them for holidays and taking to the beach and so on. This is such a good beach read, I think.
Thank
And as I
you.
told you when we were just setting up the studio, I read it in a day.
That's great.
I love it when I get a book that I am just so into that I kind of forget to eat and I definitely forget to do any washing or laundry. That's easy though for me, to be honest. But looking at your 15 novels, do you have a favorite?
Well, Seven Summers is probably my favorite, actually. It's because it was such an emotional outpouring. It was such an emotional book. This is the one before that. And I think that's my favorite. Someone I used to know is maybe the one that I'm the most proud of. It was set in the world of fostering, and it's just got a really strong message of love and care and these inspirational foster parents. And there's a big old twist in there that I still remember the joy of I didn't tell my editor what the twist was and just getting this text message saying, oh my God, I thought it was this. It was what was going on. Suddenly you pull the rug out. And so that was really fun. So that's one that I'm really proud of. But I think Seven Summers for a while is going to be my favorite just because, I've never fallen so head over heels in love with two male characters at the same time. It's a love triangle, but it's sort of told over the previous 6 summers with, this love story between Liv and Finn, and then this current summer when she's choosing to move on with someone new, and regardless of whether or not Finn comes back that summer, and it was really heartbreaking for various reasons. But yeah, that's probably always going to be my favorite, I think, for some time.
So you mentioned writing when you had a baby at your side. What do your family think? How do they support you in your writing career? They're very proud of you.
I mean, I'm sure they are, but it's not like I don't regularly get told. My husband, is very proud of me, and my mum and dad. The kids is just something that mum does, I think. And and they're very good about like I said, okay, no one interrupt me. I'm recording something now. And, they're all really good. They just sort of, go and hang out in their bedrooms and let
Yeah.
me get on. But I mean, ultimately, I write when they're at school and when they're home. I see them at school every single morning, and I'm here to welcome them home almost every single day. Like, it's only when I'm on deadline for like the last sort of couple of really fierce weeks of writing that I'm not as present as their mum. So and then my husband will kind of take them up north to go and visit grandparents for the last weekend, and I can just completely immerse myself in the story, because guaranteed I will be in floods of tears and really kind of getting into character. And
Is that how you feel at the end sometimes as well? Because I'm a bit of a baby, and I do often cry at the end of books. It's almost like a bereavement, isn't it? When you come to the end, it's like, oh, I'm not going to have that character living in my head anymore tomorrow. I finished this book and I want to know, I can often imagine the next chapter that's not there.
Yeah.
If it's a good book and you really want it to continue. So you really emotionally get very invested, I'm sure.
I do. And, usually the characters will go through some sort of upheaval. And like I say, I mean, especially Seven Summers and 5 years from now, another previous book, which is also quite sad. It's very bittersweet, both of them. So they were especially emotional. But there's usually some scene in my books that will kind of like, is a little bit more emotional. This one here is one of my least like had emotional stories, but I still, like, it still brings me to tears, when I read it. And
Whether it's happy or sad, it's still a
yeah,
tearful moment, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's a rush of emotion.
Okay, other than your own repertoire, your own archives, what would be your favorite book? If you could recommend any book to anybody, is there a book that has inspired you, or is just the one that it's your go-to, your most favorite book?
Not really. Like, I just absolutely love writers that make me feel like, I love to read sort of like emotional romance, and not necessarily sad, not sad romance, but just ones that, really kind of like take you on an emotional journey, and, the characters go through some upheaval. So I really like Abby Jimenez. She's one of my favorite authors at the moment, but I just absolutely love romance. I love Emily Henry. I've just interviewed
Oh, yeah.
Emily last night, actually, for
I
Waterstones.
saw, yeah.
Yeah, which was amazing. Like, she's one of my absolute favorite
So you
authors.
still do a bit of journalism, don't you? You still do the interviewing side, which is
Only
so
for
fun.
these, like, I haven't done that at all, like in sort of 18, practically sort of 17, 18 years, like, this is the first. Normally I'm just on stage with my author friends and we're chatting to each other. But I said, like, if I can ever interview Abby Jimenez or Emily Henry, please put me forward,
Count me
because
in, yeah.
they're two of my absolute favorites. So, and I love Colleen Hoover, like, I really like her books, Reminders of Him is probably that's going to get made into a film at the moment. And I'm really excited for that, because that's one of my favorite ones of hers that I've written, which is one of her most recent ones. But
Are there any little options on your books at the moment? Because I know these things take a long time, but
yeah, they do. No, there's not. I think out of all of my books, that What If I Never Get Over You is the most filmic, actually. I can really see that.
it does feel very cinematic to me. It's very, very visual. I can see the scenes extremely clearly, and a lot of the gardening things would be just luscious to
Yeah.
film in walled gardens and with all those looping and it, and water and through the forest and the woods. It would lend itself very, very nicely to a movie. So I hope if anybody's listening to this who fancies getting in touch with Paige, they should. Now, what are you going to be doing over the summers? It's lots of festivals, not just the music festivals, there's the book festivals. Will you be at any of those? Where can people come and meet you?
My next event is it's a Bournemouth Writing Festival. It's on all of my social media at Paige Toon author, or at pagetoon.com. Like, I have anything that I'm doing live is there. But I have just come off the back of a 3-week tour, so
Yeah, need a bit of a break.
having a bit of a break now. I've got to do my edits for my next book. Then I'm going to have a little bit of a break, hopefully. But then I need to just start hitting, have to hit the ground running in September. My next deadline for the next book is the end of January. So it's not like there's a
You
real.
are on that treadmill over and over again. Well, we love it. And I'm looking forward to your next book as well, which will be out in spring 2026. And in the meantime, go follow Paige on Instagram. That's at Paige Toon author. You've got your own website as well. So you post on there pretty regularly, I think, and keep people up to date. And go out and buy What If I Never Get Over You? It's a lovely, lovely book. So thank you so much for joining me today on my book club.
Thank you so much for having me.